Let's not waste any time. So Shadow's gameplay is kind of similar to Sonic's, but with some distinct differences. Shadow has some of the same moves that Sonic has, obviously, like he's got the homing attack, the light speed dash, he's got the little running kick move that you can do. But actually, that's it for shared moves Shadow has with Sonic. The rest of his abilities are totally unique, which is cool that they actually have finally given Shadow a unique moveset for the first time instead of just making him a clone of Sonic. Though it is a little bit weird that he doesn't even have a spin dash. Like, that's such a fundamental thing for this type of Sonic gameplay, and Shadow just can't do it in this game, which is very odd. But to talk about the rest of Shadow's moveset, we actually have to touch on his core design overall for his gameplay, because like Sonic is the traditional Sonic adventure, you know, speed-based platforming stuff. Silver is your more typical 3D platforming, and Shadow, while he does have a lot of that same speedy adventure-style platforming in his levels, it's not as much of a focus for Shadow's gameplay. Shadow's gameplay is more focused on combat, actually, and so a lot of his moves have to do with fighting enemies. I'd say the primary thing that Shadow can do is, after a homing attack, you can repeatedly hit the jump button, and Shadow will do like a bunch of punches and kicks to do kind of like a combo string, dealing extra damage to larger enemies. Which, this move does let Shadow take out enemies faster than Sonic can generally, but overall, it's not a particularly great move in my opinion, because it ultimately kind of just boils down to mashing the A button over and over and over whenever you're fighting large groups of enemies. Ironically, for a character focused on combat, the core of Shadow's combat is the shallowest of the three main characters. And due to this, his combat can actually start to feel repetitive, though he does have some extra moves that spice things up a little bit. Like, for example, he has the Chaos Spear that he can shoot from the air, although this move isn't super useful. All it does is stun enemies, which, while stunning enemies is great for Silver, it doesn't really get you very much with Shadow. Pretty much the only enemies I find it worth to stun are these worm things, just to prevent them from digging underground so you can't attack them until they come back up. But other than that, the Chaos Spear is not really useful at all, I would say. Like, this game really needs enemies where, like, you have to Chaos Spear them to, like, open them up first or something, so then you can hit them with homing attacks after, but there's nothing like that. However, Shadow does have one other thing in his toolkit that is much more significant and actually does contribute to his combat in quite a cool way, which is his meter. Shadow's meter works differently than Sonic's and Silver's. It starts empty, and as you kill enemies, it will slowly fill up over time. And similar to Shadow the Hedgehog, actually, once your meter is full, then you can activate Chaos Boost. And while in Chaos Boost, the meter will slowly drain over time, but while you're in this state, Shadow will gain access to Chaos powers that enhance his normal abilities. First of all is the Chaos Snap, which is kind of similar to a homing attack. However, instead of, like, flying over to the enemy to hit them, Shadow just instantly teleports right on top of the enemy and hits them right away. This move doesn't look particularly great because this game is unfinished. Like, there's not a very good effect showing that Shadow is teleporting around. The camera kind of just jerks and now you're suddenly in a different location hitting an enemy. So it's a little bit awkward, but the actual functionality of the move is pretty good. It doesn't really necessarily give you access to anything that Shadow can't normally do as far as combat goes, but similar to his combo attack after the homing attack, it allows him to speed up his combat that much more, because now Shadow doesn't even have to travel the distance of a homing attack that you normally would, letting him kill enemies much faster. And one cool thing about the Chaos Snap is because you teleport to your target instead of dashing toward them, sometimes one way the game will force you into combat is it'll put like a spring inside of a box, and that box will only open once you've killed all the enemies. However, with the Chaos Snap, you can homing attack onto this spring and Shadow will teleport inside the box, allowing you to skip this combat encounter entirely, which is pretty neat. One awkward thing about the Chaos Snap, though, is that it is on the same input, kind of, as the homing attack, and it has a little bit of a problem in that if you try to do a Chaos Snap and there's nothing to lock onto, then Shadow will just basically drop like a rock out of the air, which is fine when you're fighting enemies, but when there's like a line of enemies that you're meant to do a homing attack chain on, if you try to do a Chaos Snap and there's nothing for you to go to, then instead of bouncing up off the enemy, you're just gonna fall down and probably end up killing yourself over a bottomless pit or something. However, you actually can get around this pretty easily because the Chaos Snap is actually triggered by holding the homing attack button as opposed to just tapping it. So if you are in the boosted state and you just want to do homing attacks and not the Chaos Snap, all you have to do is tap the jump button instead of holding it and it won't be a problem. This is just something that the game never really tells you, so a lot of people have trouble with it. But overall, Chaos Snap is pretty cool, and that's what you get at level 1 of Chaos Boost. If you look at the bottom right corner of Shadow's meter, there are those 3 little pips there, and those all denote what level of Chaos Boost you're at. While you're in Chaos Boost, you can hit the button again to basically level up to the next tier of Chaos Boost, which grants you access to even more Chaos abilities. At level 2 of Chaos Boost, Shadow gets the Chaos Lance, which is an enhanced version of the Chaos Spear, where now instead of just stunning enemies, it will actually do damage to them, which is cool on paper, but it's still not particularly useful because it's kind of inconsistent and awkward to use, and it doesn't end up really killing enemies any faster than the Chaos Snap would, so level 2 Chaos Boost is kinda worthless. However, level 3 Chaos Boost gives you access to the good old Chaos Blast, returning from Shadow the Hedgehog. However, normally in the game, this is actually Shadow's most worthless Chaos ability, because by default, the range on the Chaos Blast is so pitifully short that you will never hit anything with this thing. It is completely fucking useless. However, with the mod loader, you can fix that and give Chaos Blast some serious range, and this makes this move insanely powerful. The Chaos Blast will just kill every enemy in the game in one hit. Which is cool to finally have a Chaos Blast that's useful in this game, but it's almost a bit too useful because for some reason, I assume just because the game is unfinished, the Chaos Blast doesn't consume any meter to activate in this game, so with a Chaos Blast of this power level, you basically don't have to fight enemies anymore once you hit level 3. Though, to be honest, I'm not really going to call that much of a criticism because you only get Chaos Blast when you're fairly far through Shadow's campaign, and as I said, his combat does start to kind of get a bit repetitive, so getting this ability to basically just skip combat entirely with Shadow, I actually think is a nice little perk. But it's not too broken because you still have to build up the meter in order to activate Chaos Boost initially, and there is actually a little bit of meter management you have to do with the Chaos Boost because it drains slowly over time. Because these Chaos abilities are so insanely good, the moment you fill your meter, you want to be in Chaos Boost for basically the rest of the level. Which basically means you're going to have to keep on killing enemies fairly quickly in order to counterbalance the meter draining. And this works pretty well, you know, Chaos Boost enhances your combat and lets you kill enemies faster, but in order to maintain it, then you're gonna have to take advantage of its abilities to keep killing enemies as quickly as possible to maintain your meter. And with that, there's a little bit of risk-reward decision-making in terms of what level of Chaos Boost you want to go up to, because every higher level of Chaos Boost drains the meter quicker and quicker. And so while you can just go straight to level 3 and kill everything instantly with a Chaos Blast, there are still those long stretches of platforming in Shadow's gameplay where you're not really going to be killing enemies very much, and your meter is just going to be draining super fast as you go through those sequences. So maybe sometimes it would be better to just stay at Chaos Boost level 1 so you'll last much longer and you can get through that platforming until you get to the next combat sequence where now you can go up to level 3 and let loose. If you really want to optimize the use of Shadow's Chaos abilities and stay boosted as much as possible, there is a little bit of extra stuff going on to this combat that does make it kinda fun. However, one big problem with Shadow's meter is that there's a lot of instances in the game where it will automatically empty your meter for you and there's nothing you can do about it. Anytime you have to go through a loading screen or anytime you switch to one of Shadow's sidekicks, it just empties your meter, which just kinda sucks, man. You have to spend all this time killing all these enemies in order to build up your meter for the payoff of having the Chaos Boost, and then the game just takes it away from you, like what the fuck? However, combat is not the only thing that Shadow's gameplay is kinda focused on, because another thing that they've brought back from Shadow the Hedgehog is vehicles that Shadow can ride around in. And while in that game a lot of the vehicles were pretty fucking useless because they were slower than Shadow was by default, in Sonic 06 everyone is a slow-ass bitch, and so these vehicles actually do become pretty useful for speeding Shadow up. However, unfortunately, these vehicle sequences are fucking terrible. This is not something that I have anything good to say about. There's no mods to make this better. There's no, actually, if you figure out how it works, then it's actually... No, nothing like that. These vehicles are just straight up trash. They're very shitty to control, the turning is really awkward, they have really fucked up physics and will bounce and flip all over the place. If you go too fast on the motorcycle, then it will just take damage for no reason whatsoever. There are these hang glider sequences that are so short that they might as well not even be in the game. Universally, these vehicle sequences are fucking terrible, but unfortunately, most of the time, they are mandatory, and that really sucks. Oh, and by the way, special shoutouts in particular to this fucking hovercraft thing you have to do. Jesus fucking Christ, this thing is fucking awful. Anybody who's played this game can tell you, this one part of Dusty Desert is Shadow. God, it's so bad. One thing, though, about the vehicles that I do find funny is that they all have guns on them, like they wanted to bring the gunplay back into Shadow's gameplay from Shadow the Hedgehog, but after that game being a laughingstock, they were like, okay, we're not gonna let Shadow hold any guns, but he can drive vehicles that have guns, and that's still okay, right? Another thing that feels a bit Shadow the Hedgehog-y is this one part of White Acropolis with Shadow, where your goal becomes destroying all these searchlights using the rockets from the buggy in this big open area. And this very much feels like the kind of thing that would be like a mission in a Shadow the Hedgehog level now, doesn't it? Kinda cool how they were sort of trying to make this a bit of a sequel to Shadow the Hedgehog when playing as Shadow. Anyway, of course, Shadow does have his two sidekicks like everybody else, and the first one he has is Rouge, and Rouge, as you could expect, plays similarly to Knuckles with her gliding and climbing, although instead of kicks in this game, she instead throws bombs, kind of like how Tails does, although for her, they're just normal bombs. And really, that's pretty much Rouge. She's just kind of Knuckles and Tails combined together. The one thing I do want to point out when it comes to the Knuckles and Rouge gameplay in this game is that they don't have the treasure hunting gameplay that they were saddled with in the Sonic Adventure games. Here in Sonic 06, they actually do go through linear platforming sequences like everybody else, and for the most part, it generally works, because normally Rouge and Knuckles are kind of confined to interior locations where they don't have the freedom to glide and climb around and just skip everything, and also normally they usually have some kind of objective to their level design that they have to do, such as lighting up all these orbs or hitting a switch or something like that. And I appreciate Sonic Team actually managing to find a way to get their gameplay to work in more traditional Sonic gameplay. Though there are a couple of sequences where you play as Knuckles and Rouge in more open levels, and these are completely fucked, because you could just glide right past the entire level straight to the end. But interestingly, for Rouge in particular, she has one sequence that actually kind of is like the treasure hunting in SA2, where she is let loose in a big, wide, open area, and she has to collect 3 keys that are hidden around. There's no radar for this sequence, and the keys don't have randomized locations every time. It is just this one part of this one level. But it is kind of cool that they managed to get some form of that treasure hunting gameplay in this, even if that's not particularly my favorite thing. And actually, in Shadow's hard and very hard version of his levels, almost all of Rouge's levels are about collecting keys hidden around. And so there's sort of kind of a facsimile of the treasure hunting gameplay in this game, a little bit. And actually, in general, Shadow's gameplay kind of, to me, ends up feeling like all of the extra stuff that was in the Sonic Adventure games as far as the alternate playstyles. Shadow kind of gets saddled with all that kind of stuff, because Omega's gameplay is a little bit similar to the mech shooting from the Sonic Adventure games. Not one-to-one or anything like that, but there are some similarities here. Because Omega's moves are all entirely focused on combat and killing enemies, mainly with guns. He's got this little shotgun blast move that he can do, which normally is completely fucking useless because the range is so short, but this can be fixed with the mod loader. From the air, he has these energy blasts that he can shoot that deal heavy damage to a single target, and if you hold the attack button with Omega and then release, then he'll shoot a bunch of homing shots that will target multiple enemies and deal small amount of damage to all of them. And this move, to me, in particular, kind of feels similar to the mech shooting of Sonic Adventure, just in terms of how it's executed and how it feels. You know, you hold the button, you lock onto a bunch of targets, and then you release the button and shoot at all of them at once. You don't have to lock onto the targets manually, it's all done with the auto-lock system, but it's kind of similar, isn't it? And Omega kinda even has the slow descending hover from the mech gameplay as well. Although one thing about this hover is that you know how you can feather Silver's hover to make it last much longer and go way further than you're supposed to be able to? Well, with that move, you are still limited by the meter. Eventually that will run out and you will no longer be able to do it. But Omega can actually do the same thing, and his hover is not governed by a meter at all, which means that Omega can just straight up fly. And yes, this is totally fucking busted, and you could use it to do all kinds of shit for going out of bounds and skipping shit as Omega, and it's completely fucked up. But it is kind of fun, isn't it? So in the end, Shadow's campaign ends up feeling like the most varied one of the 3 campaigns, again, kind of similar to Sonic Adventure. And overall, I kind of like Shadow's campaign. It's not as good as the Sonic one at all. I think Sonic is definitely by far the most fun of the characters to play as. And while Shadow's combat can get a little bit repetitive, the Chaos Boost and meter management stuff kind of props that up a little bit and makes it a bit more fun. And the fact that Shadow does still have a lot of traditional Sonic Adventure style speed-based platforming makes it still an overall enjoyable campaign to me, even if, like, the vehicle crap sucks. And I don't mind his 2 sidekicks either, so overall, you know, it's pretty good. Though I would probably say this is the most flawed of the campaigns, just in terms of how many issues it has, which I guess just makes it even more similar to Sonic Adventure. And speaking of similarities to Sonic Adventure, another thing worth talking about overall in Sonic 06 is the general game structure, because like Sonic Adventure, it does have the different campaigns where you play as the different characters and you go through the levels, and each of them are remixed to the character that you're currently playing as. But also, Sonic 06 brings back the hub worlds from Sonic Adventure, and with them, the overall pacing of the game is also very similar to Sonic Adventure, where you're kind of following the story primarily. After most of the levels, you're going to go back to the hub world, you're going to walk around, look for the next level entrance, you're going to walk around and find cutscenes, boss fights, and it's all just kind of thrown around randomly at the whims of the story, rather than like a structured game like Sonic Heroes or Shadow the Hedgehog. And overall, I'm still very much not a fan of this structure. I think these hub worlds kind of just get in the way of the pacing of the game, and in some ways it's kind of worse than it was in Sonic Adventure, because now this game has added town missions to the game, which are kind of like side quests that you can do in the hub worlds, which on paper I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I actually kind of like the idea of having some real gameplay to actually do in the hub worlds, as opposed to Sonic Adventure 1, where they were basically empty wastelands with almost nothing going on. However, these town missions aren't particularly great. Like, they're at best kind of okay. They mainly constitute things like going through a bunch of hoops, or killing a group of enemies, or collecting a certain number of things hidden around the hub world. And, you know, overall these are fine, though there are some that really fucking suck. There's a couple of, like, quote-unquote math ones that are terrible, or you have to, like, find some fucking kids that are running around in a game of tag. So these are very much a mixed bag. Some of them are okay, some of them are kind of shitty, but none of them I would ever say are, like, particularly great. I'm certainly not gonna load these up just for fun when I'm playing Sonic 06. Really, the only reason that you do any of these is because some of them are mandatory in the main campaign, which is not great. They kind of just fuck up the pacing even more than this structure already does. Not to mention that by default, the loading screens fuck up the pacing even more beyond belief. However, of course, shoutouts to Sonic Man. This one side quest is fucking great just because of how hilarious it is. And another thing going on in the hub worlds, I guess, is that there are silver medals hidden around in them, similar to how there are in the main levels. So that's another thing that, you know, they try to improve the hub worlds off of Sonic Adventure, of like, hey, you can collect these medals now, you can look around and explore a little bit, that's something to do. Which, you know, it's kind of fun to collect these things a bit until you get to, like, just a couple left and you have no idea where they are. And there's also the problem of you don't actually get anything for collecting all these, you just do it for the sake of doing it. So my recommendation would just be, don't do it. Lastly, of course, once you complete all 3 campaigns of the game, then you unlock the last story, which is just one final level where you play as almost all of the characters in the game, and then the Supersonic minigame final boss. And the last level is okay. It's kind of cool that you play as pretty much all the characters all in one go, though this level is just kind of taking a bunch of pieces from other levels and rearranging them again, so not the best final level in the world. And as far as the Supersonic final boss goes, this is probably the worst one yet. It's just a very shitty version of this minigame, and I'm not really going to say anything more than that. So that's Sonic 06. Jesus Christ, finally got through all of it. So much to talk about with this game. However, one final thing I want to touch on is the topic of this game being Sonic Adventure 3. A lot of people say that this game is basically Sonic Adventure 3, even though it's not called Adventure 3. And I am personally very much inclined to agree with that notion. You could make a couple of arguments, like, while not a Sonic Adventure game, in terms of the core game design, Sonic Heroes is very much the sequel to SA2, but overall the game is structurally trying to be more similar to the classic games, and it doesn't have the alternate playstyles and all that, plus it's significantly reduced focus on story, so it's very different than the adventure games. Shadow is also doing very much its own thing with its weird structure of the different choices and missions and all that. You could argue that the story is kind of befitting of being called Adventure 3, but if you're gonna make that argument, then I would honestly say that Sonic Battle is worthy of being called Adventure 3, because that game definitely has an adventure-style story, but at the same time, that game is a spin-off fighting game for a handheld, so that's definitely not Adventure 3. However, this game overall, it has a lot of adventure stuff in it all over the place. However, I would actually go on to argue that it's not just Sonic Adventure 3, it's kind of trying to be the culmination of everything that these 3D Sonic games were doing up to this point, because it has elements from all of the 3D Sonic games. Like, obviously from Adventure, it has the hub worlds and the general structure of the game, the multiple different campaigns you play where you go through the levels and they're all remixed a little bit for the different characters. Tails gameplay is kind of brought back in a way, Rouge kind of has the return of the treasure hunting gameplay, Omega kind of has the mech shooting gameplay back, and some vehicle sections thrown in there for good measure. Those hang glider sequences are kind of similar to like the Sky Chase of Sonic Adventure 1, aren't they? And Amy's gameplay is also similar to her gameplay from Sonic Adventure. But also similar to Sonic Adventure 2, you have 3 characters assigned to each campaign. But similar to Sonic Heroes, we don't have different gameplay styles in this game for the most part. Everybody is doing the traditional style of Sonic platforming. However, better than Sonic Heroes is that every character in the game has a unique set of abilities that makes them play differently than one another, actually improving on what Sonic Heroes was doing by cutting down the repetition substantially, and it also helps that the levels are much more rearranged than they were in Sonic Heroes. Sonic Heroes, it was mainly just doing it for different difficulties, but Sonic 06 is kind of like a midway between Sonic Adventure's version and Sonic Heroes' version of remixed levels. Everybody kind of has the same core gameplay, sort of, but the levels aren't just different difficulties, they are actually substantially changed depending on which character you're playing as. You'll go to completely different parts of the levels, you'll play them in different orders, some levels you won't even do as some characters go through other characters' sequences backwards, and all kinds of stuff like that. In terms of the structure of reusing and remixing level design, I'd actually kind of argue that Sonic 06 has the best version of it thus far. And I would also argue that it kind of has the best version of multiple playable characters because it doesn't have all these different alternate gameplay styles that I don't really find as enjoyable as the core gameplay. And again, similarly to Shadow the Hedgehog, we kind of have something similar to the projectile-based combat with Silver. We have Shadow using his Chaos powers based on a meter, similar to Shadow the Hedgehog, and the vehicles are also kind of back as well. So this game is really trying to take everything that they were doing in all the previous 3D Sonic games and try to put them all together in a way where they work better than they have in any of the previous games. Emphasis on trying. They did not obviously succeed at that. But I do see what they were going for here, and in some ways I would argue that they at least partially succeeded. I honestly do believe that if this game was properly finished, it could have had the potential to be the best of these 3D Sonic Adventure style Sonic games. Maybe, who knows what the final version of Sonic 06 would look like. Maybe it would only be a little bit better than the final product, but there is potential here. I do see that they were really trying to make the biggest and bestest Sonic Adventure game that they possibly could. And I do appreciate that effort. The final product might have been a bit of a fucking disaster, But I don't think Sonic 06 was just one giant mistake. It was a game that I think could have worked out pretty well and ended up a very good game. It just wasn't finished. And that is not Sonic Team's fault. I won't blame anyone for thinking this game is a piece of garbage due to all of its millions of issues, but personally, I do think there is still fun to be had in this game. In fact, and this is probably going to piss some people off, I like Sonic 06 more than Sonic Adventure 2. And that's not just the modded version, I like the base, normal Sonic 06 more than SA2. Before I go, I should probably briefly touch on Project 06 so I don't get a million comments asking about that. I think Project 06 is awesome. It fixes even more issues than these mods ever possibly could for the original game. It's just all around super cool, and you should absolutely go play it. That's all I'm going to say about it for now. I'm going to talk more in depth about Project 06 another time. Of course, we're not quite done talking about Sonic 06 now, are we? Because we still have to cover the story. Oh boy, that should be interesting. So I'll see you then. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed.